pleasure to see you all today. My name is Lola. Today I will be hosting our first Artist Roundtable for Emergence Season 3, bringing your culture to the world. So thank you all so much for joining us today. If it's your first time, we would love to give you a very warm welcome, and to all of our familiar faces, we are so glad to see you again. We would love to start today's session by acknowledging that today's session is coming from the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We'd also like to acknowledge the generous support of Creative BC and the province of British Columbia, the city of Vancouver, and our host organization, Red Chamber Cultural Society. Some quick housekeeping, just to let you all know, today's session is being live streamed to our Facebook page and recorded. A friendly reminder to please mute your mic unless you are speaking. Now, I would love to introduce our amazing panelists today. They'll be sharing some of their thoughts and experiences before we go into a Q&A session. So today's topic is bringing your culture to the world. Keeping your cultural identity in modern music is not only important, but essential for success. Today we have with us alumna Tissa Rahim. The Persian powerhouse is an established West Coast musician with a 40-city North American tour under her belt. She has performed at the House of Blues in New Orleans, the Gramercy Theatre in New York, and Vancouver's quintessential jazz and soul club, Guilt & Co. Named one of 24 magazine's top 24 under 24, her collaborators include producers such as 100 Monkeys and Jason Rathbone. We have core mentor Zizi or Darcy, who co-writes, produces, and collaborates with songwriters, producers, artists, and performers from both North America and Asia. Committed to bridging people through music, she is a cultural ambassador. We also have our core mentor, Dr. Deirdre Morgan, professor of music at Vancouver Community College. She holds a PhD in music from SOAS, University of London. She's a leading scholar of the Jew's harp, an ancient mouth-resonated musical instrument found in many cultures around the world. An active member of the Global Jew Heart Revival, Morgan has researched and played the instrument since 2005, speaking, performing, and conducting research in 12 countries. An interdisciplinary performer, Morgan has appeared on local and international stages of all sizes as a soloist, collaborator, and ensemble member. So thank you to our wonderful artists for joining us today. Tissa, I would love to open up with your discussion, please.
Sure. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. I'm really excited to be a part of this. So for me, when it comes to the idea of integrating my culture into my artistry and my music, it's a really interesting topic because I grew up in quite a multicultural way. So my family comes from Iran originally, but I was actually born in Vienna in Austria. So that means that my first language was Farsi, and then German, and then English when we moved here. So culture is a really interesting topic because I feel like in terms of your unique upbringing, it can be very individual to you, but it's also a thing that connects you with those around you. And I think the true goal of trying to incorporate your culture into music and everything that you do is to lean into the unique blend of culture that exists within you. Because our goal isn't to create, a cultural monolith. We want to show people that each culture is made up of unique individuals with their unique individual voices. And for me, the journey of incorporating more sort of Middle Eastern music into my genre, it honestly just came about naturally. It wasn't something that I really had to overthink. It just kind of came about from realizing that when I started to write for myself, I was already incorporating some of the music that I grew up with, surrounded by my family. And once I realized that, I just started to sort of more actively lean into it. And I also found that once I started to lean into that, there was a lot of opportunities for example, such as Emergence, that work with people and women from underrepresented groups. And I think one of the key points that I've had to learn is that there's going to be some people who will connect with your music and some people who will not. But who you focus on is the people that will connect with your music, because those are the people that are going to be sticking around and wanting to be follow your journey and be a part of your journey. In terms of how I actively incorporate my culture, what I'm trying to do more so now is to, on social media, for example, create posts that aren't only in English, but also in Farsi and even in German sometimes, as well as creating, Farsi and sometimes German versions of songs that I've already released. As well as reaching out whenever I see somebody who has maybe a similar background or even just like talks about similar themes in their music, not being afraid to reach out to them and try to connect with them, over social media or, at networking opportunities and things like that. And sort of the overall thing that I would want to get across today is that when I first started in music, it actually used to be honest with you, a bit of a detriment to be somebody that was from a minority group or even just being a woman in music. But I've noticed in the last decade or so, there's been quite a big shift in that sense. And having that unique cultural identity has almost become like a superpower, like something that you can lean into. And that's something that's worked really well for me.
Thank you so much, Tissa. Now, can we go on to Miss Zizi? Darcy, would you like to share your experiences with us?
Yeah, I'd love to. And thank you, Tissa, for that. Before I go into my opening statement, I guess, I just wanted to echo a couple of things that Tissa said. You probably saw me nodding along because it really resonated with me, as somebody who was an immigrant or is an immigrant to this country. There was a really long and challenging process of finding who I was as a person, not even an artist, just as a person, especially when you're a teenager, you just desperately want to fit in. So as a result, for a long time, I didn't think it was a good idea to show my cultural heritage and, to be in any way so-called non-mainstream. So that included music. And it wasn't much later in my life that I actually started to embrace things like, say, just in application of it, featuring a traditional Chinese instrument in a pop song. I had my mom play the zheng, the zither, in one of my pop songs. Also what Tissa said, singing in both English and another language. So in my case, Mandarin, Chinese, within a single piece of composition. Or I've also done this, do two versions of it in both languages. So just as an example, most recently through our sister programming under the Red Chamber Cultural Society, the Fall Moon Concert Series, I got to collaborate with a slide guitar master musician from India and his daughter, who's this amazing singer. And the song was called Daughters of the Himalaya, and it was more or less really not very much, it's not my genre, it's more of a world genre. But the opportunity was so unique, and I just wanted to play something different, and it was interesting in the recording process. It just came to me naturally that I pulled out this vocal technique I've never used before. It's just something I had always heard growing up, and it was so subconscious, and it was this type of Tibetan vocal style. It's like a little, just something a little different than what I would usually do. But it really fit that piece, and it really fit the soundscape and of the composition. So I guess I just wanted to point out that, I think it's definitely, for me, it was a process from finding who I was as a person, slowly integrating that into the artistry aspect of it. So I guess, for me, mentioned that I was born into my Chinese heritage, however, I think throughout my musical life and career, I've come to really appreciate and adopted many cultures along the way. So today's topic is bringing your culture to the world. I was thinking about this topic and I thought, is it better to just say bringing yourself to the world? Because it's such a multifaceted concept, right? There's so many nuances in culture. So I think we draw inspirations and it's like we take colors that we like from this wide palette and they inform our own unique culture, our individual culture as a person, as a unique individual. So many things really inform this. And, it's like Tissa said, it could be another language that we speak. She speaks 3. A music training that we've received. I started out with classical music training. So, I still see that it's very visible in the way I write music. That type of training really stayed with me, even though I operate in the pop music space. I can see how my process is affected by that training since I was a child. It could be an artist who's profoundly influenced you in terms of your taste. So one thing I wanted to point out is I think as a result, there can also be I just invented this term, but like reverse cultural sharing. So, and Tissa, you may relate to this, when I went to China with my career a few years ago, it was funny because I almost went there as somebody who was different from the majority of the Chinese artists from China, because I had come here and, transformed myself in, like brought in all these different colors into me. And then I brought it back into China and shared a different version of what a Chinese artist could be. So, that's another thing is I never really like to sort of limit myself and identify as, oh, I'm a Chinese artist or I'm a Canadian artist. I think in many ways I think of myself as kind of a world person, just because I've drawn so many cultures into me. So yeah, I just wanted to start out with that. Hopefully that made sense.
Thank you so much for sharing, Darcy. Deirdre, may I invite you to speak now?
You may, thank you. Yeah, Darcy, it was interesting what you were just saying, reflecting on the title of today's talk, how to bring your culture to the world. And you were thinking maybe it could be how to bring yourself, or maybe how to bring your cultures with an S at the end, because, that's really the point that I want to touch on in my opening statement today, is that we are all sitting at an intersection of multiple identities and multiple cultures that have shaped who we are. And that's going into Tissa's point about culture is something that we actually experience on a very individual level. It's extremely personal, and we are all members of actually multiple cultures. So I kind of wanted to take a minute today to maybe define culture. How are we even defining culture? It's a big word. It's a single word that contains many, many, many other ideas inside of it. So I just wanted to draw on a kind of academic and political concept called intersectionality. Some of you might have heard it before. The term was coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 in a paper she wrote. I'm just popping a link in the chat for anybody who wants to see. There's an article about her and the history of this term. So it's been used in a way to sort of delineate how all of us have multiple identities and how that plays into power and privilege. But for the purposes of our talk today, I want to talk about how the multiple intersections of different cultures play into our identities more broadly. So I wanted to give you a little story time, show and tell from my own life as a weirdo artist performer. This is going all the way back to 2011. And this is a moment in my life where I was invited to do a performance at a very, very, very big thing. And it was the 7th International Jews Harp Congress, and it was held in Yakutsk, Sakha Republic, which is in Siberia, in Russia. And this was a major, major, major event for the instrument that I play and study, the Jews harp, which is this. Some of you have seen me wield this around before. So it was a huge international gathering of all these Jews harp people from around the world. And I was the only person going from Canada, literally traveling like 3/4 of the way around the globe from Vancouver. I could have gone the short way, but I couldn't. There's no flights to go the short way. So I went to Moscow first, and then, yeah, it was like a really, really, really long journey. It was not carbon neutral at all. But that was 2011. So the performers were all invited to be in this big showcase concert. And in the documentation that we received, they said, please wear your traditional costume. And I was like, oh no. What is my tradition? What is my culture? My ancestry is like British Isles, North Atlantic, but I grew up on the West Coast, the Southwest coast of British Columbia, and I was born in 1984, and like I had to do a very, very deep dive and actually try to define for myself what actually is my culture and how would I represent that visually, like in terms of a costume. So some people, like my friends from Austria, they had a much easier assignment because they could all just show up in lederhosen, and they did. All my Austrian Jews friends, they just have lederhosen like lying around in their closets. So they were just like, okay, pack it up. But for me, it was a harder thing. So I really had to figure out what is my culture. And I realized I don't have a culture. I don't have a culture. I don't experience culture in the singular. I experience it as a plurality of like all these different intersections of aspects of my identity. So I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna show you a photo taken from me on stage at this performance and what I ended up. Okay, here it comes. Okay. So what I eventually came up with is that, you know, I'm not going to go up there just because I'm of Irish heritage. I'm not going to go up there and start playing traditional Irish music because that is not one of the aspects of my culture that resonates as strongly, and particularly not in a visual way, not in a costuming way. So my deep dive took me to the answer that I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. Like I grew up in the 90s. Neon leopard print is my favorite thing ever. I grew up with like, you know, Barbie and Polly Pocket and all these like really, really, really cheesy sort of pink plastic things in the 90s. And that's a huge part of who I am, actually. To this day, I love cassette tapes. Like that's my favorite music format is cassette tapes. So I'm, you know, I strongly identify my culture. One of my strongest cultures for me is actually just being like an elder millennial. So I'm at the older range of millennials, but I do really identify with my generation. And yeah, and also, you know, I'm wearing like a mini dress and faux fur and jewelry from a bunch of different places, and I'm wearing flip-flops, which it was summer and it gets really hot in Siberia in summer. So I was just wearing flip-flops on stage, which I think is kind of funny, maybe kind of irreverent, but it was just at the end of the day, I had to do me. And I felt really uncomfortable trying to represent Canada. Like I wasn't going to go up there draped in a flag because I'm not a particularly nationalistic person. So that's kind of my message to everybody, is thinking about the intersections that you sit at. You know, think about gender, think about your age. Generation is a really, really resonant one for me. My age is a huge part of who I am. The way the world was when I was growing up is a huge cultural factor that has shaped me and my ideas about the world. Think about your geographic region on a really local level. Like I actually identify much more as a West Coast BC person than I do as Canadian even. I feel that my regional identity is much stronger. And even inside of that, I'm from Maple Ridge. I grew up an hour east outside of Vancouver in the Fraser Valley, that's my regional identity. I'm from the Fraser Valley. Like, that's where I'm from. I'm from Maple Ridge, and that culture is really, really important to me. Also, think about the culture of your family. You know, your parents might come from different cultures. Not all of our parents come from the same two cultures or same two places in the world. So all of us are already, because we're the children of, you know, two parents, we're already going to be a mix and a blend of various influences. So I guess that's to conclude. Look at all of your identities and figure out which ones just resonate the most for you. And it doesn't have to be the ones you think should resonate the most for you. Some of us feel really connected to our family culture. Some of us do not. Some of us feel really strongly connected to our ancestry. Some of us do not. And there's lots of really valid reasons for all experiences of how, which of our identities come through and which we feel safe and happy to express and which we want to amplify in ourselves as performers. So I will leave my statement there for now.
Thank you so much, Deirdre, for sharing that. I would now love to open the Zoom floor to a Q&A if anyone has any questions they'd like to bring up to ask our fantastic panelists.
Lola, if it's okay, just as people are thinking about their questions, I just wanted to riff off something that Deirdre said.
Please.
So I was driving the other day and I heard this, I caught the tail end of this interview on CBC Music. And it was this story from an interview with a First Nations artist. And he was saying that, you know, sometimes people would be puzzled and say to him, well, your music doesn't sound very Indigenous. And he said, you know, what does that even mean, right? So I want to talk about expectations. Like, there are certain, I think there's these preconceived notion and expectations people in the industry set on artists when they see us or when they look at our names, right? The kind of music that you should play based on your skin color, or what kind of songs you should be singing based on your heritage. So to Deirdre's point, I think one thing that I've concluded, you know, I've been kind of all over the spectrum, and I'll talk about the spectrum later. But one thing I learned is that you really do want to purposefully incorporate these culturally significant or identifiable elements into your music, because if it's not authentic, then it just doesn't feel right doing it, and to me there's really no point, you know. Definitely want to do what feels true to you as a person first and foremost.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Darcy. Tissa or Deirdre or any of our other lovely participants, would you have any thoughts or connections to that point?
Yeah, I'll say something. Yeah, I've really been resonating with what both Darcy and Deirdre have been saying. Especially, Darcy made a point about how growing up, it was actually really difficult to be different. Like, I think as a kid, all you really want to do is to fit in. And for me, I just felt like I never really fit into any specific boxes. And growing up, that was like a bad thing. That was something that would stress me out. Like, and it wasn't even something I was putting on myself. Like, I was literally, the way that people would treat me was like, oh, you're not one of us, you know? Like, it felt like that when I was growing up in Austria. And it also felt like that when I first moved here, but they were a little bit different from one another. Like, it felt I felt it more when I was moving here in the fact that, like, for example, I moved here to Canada when I was in grade 9. At the same time, so I was moving from Austria, right? And at the same time, we had a girl from Switzerland coming to my school. And the girl from Switzerland was like immediately integrated into the friend groups like at my high school and stuff. And I wasn't. And at the time I was like, it must just be something that I'm doing. Like, I must just be weird or something. People don't want to hang out with me. But then I realized it was actually because of my skin color, because I think people just immediately assumed that I didn't speak English as well, maybe, even though I actually spoke English just as well as the girl that came from the neighboring country that I was coming from. And they probably just, you know, assumed that they maybe didn't have as much in common with me as with the other girl. And there was just things like that where when you're a kid, you don't really understand necessarily like systemic racism or discrimination, right? It took me growing up to realize that that's what was actually happening at that point, and continues to happen still, unfortunately. But the thing is, now at least we're seeing a lot more representation in like the media and things like that. And I feel like that's really sort of changing how people interact with people from different cultures, and they don't, maybe there aren't as many assumptions made. At least that's been my experience. There's still some assumptions made for me sometimes when it comes to my music, like me being Middle Eastern. I think sometimes people can be a little bit shocked that I sing about certain things that I sing about, like, you know, like sexuality and stuff. But again, like we were talking about, we're not trying to create a cultural monolith, right? We're trying to show that there's diversity within these individual cultures. And I think that's what representation is really about too.
Yeah, I think the topic of expectations and assumptions that are made around people's culture, and the idea that, especially when it comes to the music industry, there can be this incredible pressurizing force to just pigeonhole artists. And that's to do with, how do we market you, right? Like, people who are working on the marketing communication side of things, they want like a simple few, they want to distill things down to a few keywords that they can use to sell, and do like a really fast basic pitch and be like, I've got this artist, whatever. So that's tough. And that's something that a lot of us struggle to do, even when we're writing our own artist bio, for instance. How do you represent yourself in your bio? What do you include and what do you leave out strategically? And what do you include strategically? Like, there's a lot of choices that we're making along the way, because we're trying to be these complex, multifaceted, creative beings, but within capitalism and within an industry where we're trying to be sold as a commodity. So those two things, those are always going to be at odds with each other and create all kinds of tensions and problems and issues. And then also we're doing that in, you know, a profoundly unequal and racist society. And, you know, just within cultures where we have all this intersectionality of power and privilege. So trying to figure out how to navigate through that with all these multifaceted identities is really, really a challenge. I'm curious to know if anybody who is here on Zoom today, have you ever had an experience where you felt pressured to align with a certain culture or a certain aspect of identity that maybe wasn't the one that you wanted to foreground? Or, you know, we can also have positive success stories as well. Challenges, successes. We're interested in hearing all of that, if anybody would like to share.
I could speak on it a little bit. So I'm Métis, and I don't feel pressured to identify with Métis with my identity, but I do find that it's a really complicated thing for a lot of reasons. So first of all, being like mixed heritage Métis, you get that, like, people will say, oh, well, you don't sound Indigenous, but it's also, oh, well, you don't look Indigenous because, you know, I have white privilege, I have a mixed heritage, I grew up in the city. And I think a lot of Indigenous people in Canada can probably identify with the fact too that a lot of our culture was taken away from us. So my papa, his father went to residential school, and when he escaped from residential school, my family stopped practicing a lot of these cultural practices that they did before, because they were afraid for their safety and their well-being. So it's not something that I grew up around as much. Now that I'm older, I'm wanting to learn more about my culture and find like a comfy way to incorporate that into my art in a way that I identify with, because I'm a pop artist. Métis music is really fiddle and jig focused, and so I'm trying to learn more about my culture, like from the past, and find a way that will intersect with like my identity as well. So it's super complicated for sure. And especially, sorry, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but you also just want to be so careful of being respectful of the cultures, especially with Indigenous cultures in Canada. There's a lot of, now that it's considered like cool to be Indigenous, it's really easy for people to not be respectful of those things. And so it's super complicated. And I think a lot of Indigenous folks could probably identify with that.
Thank you so much for sharing, Caitlin. Yes, Jill.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Hi. Sorry, you can hear some Christmas music in the background. Our music production, we're doing a Festival of Lights in Summerland. So yeah, it's exciting. It's low key, but anyway, good morning. I just wanted to kind of go on what Caitlin had said. I have a bit of a mixed culture in my family. There's German and English, and my mom is Métis, but because she was adopted, we don't have proof, right? So when people ask, you know, are you part Métis or what are you? You just kind of feel like not technically, right? Although I feel like I'm connected to that Métis culture. But in some ways, I feel like I believe it's there. And my mom, she actually dug into her past through social services. And she was really disappointed because on her birth certificate, it said father unknown. And that is the key that we needed. And we thought that she was actually related through Gabriel Dumont. Now we don't have any proof at all, but I still feel culturally that I want to embrace that Métis culture, right? But I just feel awkward because it's not official. You know what I mean? Like I can't say we are actually Métis, although her family says we are and that sort of a thing. So I feel kind of awkward on how I can embrace that culture and add it into our music, sort of a thing. But I guess growing up in that sort of a thing, it wasn't cultural wise, because I mean we lived in town and we basically, you know, live like everyone else. But yeah, I mean that's just kind of my take on culture, is maybe sometimes we're not connected to one, because nowadays we're all connected to multiple cultures. So yeah, so I just find it a little interesting, and maybe what other people might think if I should start digging into that cultural history sort of a thing. But yeah, anyway, that's my take. So
I think that's especially hard too, because there are a lot of Indigenous and Métis folks who were removed from their families. So there's lots of people in Canada that don't have their family history. So I just wanted to say that, you know, I haven't experienced that, but I really feel that for you and I empathize with that.
that's awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. And I know I can't officially say it, but I know that through Gabriel, he was the one that gave a lot of people a name, and because they had nothing, right? So I guess part of that, because we actually went when I was young, we went to Duck Lake and we went to the powwows and I got to see the culture and I loved it so much. I just wanted to learn more, but then I felt, I guess, disconnected in a way, because we couldn't say that's officially who we were. But like you say, I mean, maybe, you know, it's something I can still embrace, and, you know, but yeah.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jill and Caitlin. Culture is certainly very complex. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if other folks have had this experience of having a disconnect from their culture, from a culture that might be part of their background. I think when this is coming from, most of us Zooming are in Western Canada right now. Specifically, British Columbia is like, you know, whatever it is, 96% unceded Indigenous territory. Unceded means that there's no treaty, there's no actual legal contract for the occupation of this land. It's literally just occupied without an agreement. So like a legal agreement. So yeah, I'm wondering if if that's resonating with other folks, because a lot of us, when we dig into heritage, there's a lot of disconnect because everybody who's not Indigenous here on this land is an immigrant, myself included. Everybody coming from various waves of immigration, and there's a lot of people's stories and family history that gets lost in translation. There are reasons that our families leave the place that they left. A lot of the time, those reasons are really difficult, even traumatic. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's just about, you know, finding more opportunity or whatever. But sometimes it's actually getting away from something or fleeing something bad. And in a lot of families, it's really hard to talk about that stuff. And I know in a lot of immigrant families, a lot of those stories get kind of like purposefully downplayed and like, let's just not talk about that because it's traumatic. And, you know, even down to people's family names getting changed so that they sound more English. Or so that they sound less German or less Jewish. I'm just thinking in the case of a lot of settlers who've come over here from Europe, especially in the middle of the 20th century around World War II. There's a lot of name changes that happened, and so it's hard to find the trail of breadcrumbs, as it were, back to your ancestral cultural identity. So just remembering ancestry is one of the intersections. It's one of the crossroads of identity. It's not everything, but it's a big one for sure. But I think a lot of folks here with immigrant backgrounds have disconnections, and a lot of folks with Indigenous backgrounds have disconnections as well because of what has happened through colonialism and through the erasure of Indigenous cultures. But there's the thing that is fascinating is that there's actually been erasure on both sides, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous cultures, for different reasons. So yeah, I wonder if anybody here has been grappling with that themselves. Do you feel really connected to some aspect of your identity? Do you feel disconnected?
So I can speak to that if that's okay. Yeah, so thank you so much, Caitlin and Jill, for sharing your unique experiences with this as well, because I think that's something really important to keep in mind, being in Canada, that some people don't even have the opportunity to necessarily discover their ancestral roots because it's been taken from them. So in that sense, I feel like there's privilege there for me, because even though my family had to leave Iran because of political violence and it was a very dangerous time, because I was surrounded by my culture growing up, I was still able to absorb a lot of that and have it become part of who I am. So I feel very privileged in that way. Of course, it is really unfortunate that my family had to flee, and the fact that we haven't really been back to Iran for decades. And I think we never really talk about like why we haven't been back. But if I were to guess, I would assume it's just a bit traumatic for my family because it's not the country that they grew up in anymore, right? Like it's been just changed, and their families were just brutalized and oppressed and continue to be oppressed. And it's just not I think I've talked about this like on social media like a few years ago, like this realization that if I was in Iran right now, I wouldn't even be able to do what I do because women aren't allowed to perform in Iran, right? So just the fact that it's this weird disconnection, because I think our culture is so rich, but it's been co-opted by these sort of fanatics who are putting in these things that have actually nothing to do with Iranian culture. It's just fanaticism. And because of that, there's this weird disconnect of, I love where I'm from, but at the same time, if I were there right now, I wouldn't be able to do what I want to do. I would be living like a completely different life. So it's sad that we can't really go back, and that is not the same. But at the same time, it's also a privilege that we were able to leave. So a lot of people haven't been able to leave, you know. So that's sort of my complicated my complicated thing with that.
Thank you, Tissa, for sharing that. Yeah, I would never have guessed all those things that you said. That's really enlightening. So this is not directly in response to what you just said, but something I think Deirdre mentioned I think that tracing back the need or the desire to trace your roots, because we feel disconnected from it. As an artist, I think it really offers actually a very exciting opportunity to transform your art, to take it to a different direction. So it's almost like your music and your art can be a documentary of that journey in a way. I think I was just thinking out loud, thinking about how that could be turned around as an opportunity as opposed to a challenge.
Marielle, do you want to say something? You look like you were reacting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was, because I totally identified with that that Darcy just said. With Susanna, who was a mentor last session, she produced my first EP, and because I'm an immigrant, I'm from Costa Rica, and I left sort of like, oh, I want to leave. Like, I'm so tired. All the guys are so macho. There's not enough opportunities. Like, oh, I just want to leave, right? And then when I came to Canada, and after a few years of living here, it just became really evident how privileged I am, because I'm so close to my ancestry. My family is so big, and we grew up so close to each other, like every week, all the time. And our family identity is so rich and it's so well defined. I guess every family has like little secrets or things, but mostly there are no secrets. Like the family tree is very clear. It goes back like 500 years. And it's very complete. Like, we really know who we are. And so coming here, I realized, I just thought that was normal. I so took it for granted that I have such a rich family identity. And when I came here, I was like, I can't believe it. I've been a millionaire all my life. I didn't know it. And so that really inspired me. And I wanted to make songs as a tribute to my family identity. Because I was so inspired by that. And so what Darcy said, I used music to make a tribute and explore more the roots of my family. So I was a lot on the phone, really long conversations. I made a song about my grandma's passing and the legacy that she left for the grandchildren. And I made that song for my family because I just thought that they would love that huge legacy. And so they heard it, and the whole thing has been like a medicine for my family, So like, more than a music project, it has been completely therapeutic for our roots, for our family, for the elders of the family. So I feel like, yes, it takes your music in a certain direction, but it also takes it to like another level, because it takes it to like a therapeutic, almost like spiritual bonding to like something that is at the very core of you, that maybe you don't know that well, but that subconsciously it is you. So I find that you make music to try to connect with that part of you. It's a spiritual process. It's like a spiritual experience, not only a music making project. Yeah.
Go ahead, Marianne.
Hi. Yeah. So it's kind of related, but not exactly in response to that. But I guess coming back to intersectionality, I just want to ask the question of maybe how do you, with all the different parts of your identity kind of coming together and finding what the most authentic part of that is, how do you find your audience or your people? So like for me, you can hear by the accent, I'm British. So I'm in Northeast England, but half Bulgarian, half Irish, brought up in the northeast of England, classical pianist, rock singer, and experimental artist. So with all these different strands, it's like trying to find the right people. And also as a woman, I feel like that really is important for me, especially in kind of worlds like rock music, where it is very macho, and really just wanting to find the people that I do authentically connect with. I'm just curious about how you guys go about finding your audience.
I mean, Jill, you're also a rock singer, right? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on how this journey has been for you?
Yeah, you know what? I've always lived in a man's world. I mean, my first job, I drove truck. I mean, it was a family of truckers, and I worked fire and EMS, you know, all that old boys school. But you know what I learned the most about that is I don't care what people think on that level. And a lot of people say that you, as a woman, you have to do extra things to prove to them who you are and where you belong. But you know what the real thing is that you only have to prove it to yourself. And when it comes to music, it's the same thing. They will find you, you know, I mean, we don't fit in a box at all. We are rock inspired. And yes, we have a classic rock band, but our original stuff, it's inspired, right? And we don't want to be in a box. We don't want to fit in a genre. I mean, you know what? I was watching a documentary on Sting, and he has the same thing. He's like, you play the music that you want and make yourself happy. And then when you make yourself happy and confident, other people will follow. So just get out there and sing, and don't worry about the venue or whatever. I think a lot of places now are not just a country band anymore. They're not just a rock band, you know. I mean, a lot of venues are, I mean, we have a lot of wineries out here in the Okanagan. So, I mean, we're lucky that way. You get, you know, a whole bunch of people coming through. But you know what? I just find if you're confident in your music and I mean, that's why we say we're painters of sound, right? We're creating art, and not everyone is going to like the artwork. But if you're happy, people gravitate towards that. So yeah, that's what I find, you know, prove it to yourself and make yourself happy. And, you know, that old, you know, saying, if you build it, they will come. So yeah, that's my point of view.
Thank you so much.
I mean, thank you so much. That's really helpful, especially when it feels like there's expectation. And again, it's a whole like trying to fit into a box. And yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you.
There's no more boxes. You know what? And there isn't, I mean, there's still places that say, oh, you need an album, or you need this, or you need that for radio or whatever. But you know what? We've had radio play all over the world, and it doesn't matter, you know, if they want to play it, they'll play it, you know, they don't care. And a lot of them are really open to that. And I think in this day and age, people don't want to be in a box. That's part of us being an artist and us being confident in who we are and saying, this is what I want to do. This is my artwork. You judge, you know. And I even read something about Andy Warhol, and he said, you're creating art. So whether their opinion is good or bad, just remember you're making them think about it, right? So you're already got their interest, whether they're complaining about it or whatever they're doing, you're creating a stir, right? So, and that's what it's about. You know, you have to be happy. You can't sit around and think, oh, I don't know if this will work or that won't work. You know what? Really, we're not the judge of that. That's not our job. Our job is to create the artwork, and it's their job to think whatever they want. So yeah, so just do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, reach out to me anytime. I love helping people, and we're like a big music family, especially here at BC Emergence, where it's amazing. You know, these ladies changed my life. So yeah, welcome.
Thank you. And what's your band name? Could you maybe put a link in the chat so I can listen?
Oh yeah, I can. It's Moving Lines, like the moving lines on the highway. Yeah, I'll leave a link.
Okay.
So awesome. And your music too. Yeah, we all share. So it's
okay.
Cool.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Anytime.
Jill just took everything that I wanted to say and then said it. Well done. But yeah, I think Marianne, I think to kind of sum up it, the best way for me personally is, and I've done it, I've done kind of everything on that spectrum. And what I've learned is the best thing is not to think about I think you need to change that narrative. It's not about how you find your audience. It's you participate in the projects that matter to you. And because you are what makes you unique, and like you just described it, classical training, rock and experimental, like you can't really get more unique than that. And that's, the uniqueness that is you. That's the best marketing. And then you do you, and you let them come to you. I think that has been proven, time and time again. That's how you have to do it. Otherwise, you just end up spending a lot of time chasing and guessing what other people want you to do, and it really, at the end, you just feel like, wow, why did I spend all that time and money doing that? So that's a little bit of just from my own experience.
Oh, thank you. There's just so many talks of like how to find your audience, how to like reach out to the right followers or whatever. And yeah, but it's totally, that kind of distracts from it distracts from everything creative as well. So it's, yeah, no, I
totally think relate. It really, that takes power from you too, because the more you go down that route, the less you're focused on your art, and then you get diluted.
Definitely. Cool, thank you.
I had people put pressure on me early on when I first started to like establish, who I was and like what my sound was and who my audience was, without allowing me to explore my music and create music and figure it out. You don't really decide who you are as an artist before you start making your art. You just make your art, and that's who you are, and that's how you discover who you are.
I wholeheartedly agree with everything that's been said. That was amazing. The only thing that I wanted to add was speaking to the idea of you were talking about being in a male-dominated field of music. I just wanted to talk to that because another thing that's been a really important discovery for me is that if you're ever in a situation with somebody and they're not respecting your boundaries, or they're trying to sort of impose certain things on you as an artist, you have to remember that you are the lead of like what you're doing, like it's your project, right? So you never have to be overly nice to somebody and keep them around just because, they've been with you from the beginning or whatever it is, some loyalty, whatever. If they're not treating you the way that you deserve to be treated, you actually have the power to just work with somebody else, You don't owe anybody the loyalty if they're not respecting you in the way that you deserve to be treated. That is something that I feel like I want every woman and every genderqueer person in music to know.
Oh, yes, I've agreed with everything said, and especially not fitting into a box and making art that's true to you. I feel like I play tradition-based music, so my own heritage is on my dad's side from Scotland, Ireland, and France, and so I play mainly music from that heritage, so Celtic music. I'm a fiddle player and singer, and sing in French and English, but my mom's side is Chinese Malaysian, and I would love to explore more of the roots from there. I write quite a bit of original music, and I'm trying to integrate all of these traditions into my own writing, and that's been very rewarding. So everything that's been said about just really integrating all of your different aspects, I really resonate with that. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone here. Thank you to our amazing panelists speaking today, Tissa, Darcy, and Deirdre. We really appreciate all the wonderful things that have been said and such a fruitful discussion. Wanted to thank you all for coming today. We are wrapping up. It's 11 now. Time has flown by. We'd love to thank our sponsors, Creative BC, City of Vancouver, and the Red Chamber Cultural Society. If anybody would like not to be featured in any portion of this video that will be going into our archives on YouTube and our website, please just email us to let us know. I'll put an email link in the chat. Also, we would love for you to spread the word if you found this to be a useful session. Our next session is going to be January 15, and it will be a 2-hour classic session on family, relationships, and music with Dee Daniels, Crystal Dos Santos, and Darcy Hahn. So thank you all so much. Feel free to connect with each other. I see lots of you are already doing it in the chat there. I will stick the email. And otherwise, hope you all have a marvelous day.
Thank you, everyone.
Yay. Thank you so much, everybody. So good to see you all.
Very
Thank
good.
you. Great to see you all.
Thank you.
And yes, happy holidays.